Welcome back to the channel. Last time we finished up the lagging on this cylinder. We got all the ports and everything drilled. So today we're going to work on the inner and outer cylinder heads here, so we can get those super glued on and then go ahead and get the rest of the holes drilled and tapped, and then we'll get some studs in here to hold some nuts to hold these heads on. So we'll get this thing set up in the lathe and start machining on it. Okay, so I got the cylinder heads done. This is the outer. And this is the inner. So the piston rod will travel through here, and there's a brass nut that we'll make that goes in there, and some packing that'll go around there. So that's threaded 1032. So what we need to do now is drill 6 holes through this to mount this head to the cylinder. So my plan is to mount the cylinder on this expanding arbor. So I'm going to put this arbor in here and then tighten this up. And then we're going to super glue the cylinder head to the cylinder. Then I'm going to set this up in an indexer. I've got a indexer that takes 5C collet, so I can put this 1/2 inch arbor in a 5C collet, and then I've got it set to index to for 6 holes. So then we'll line it up on our mark where it needs to be. We'll get it centered up, and then we'll move over. It's a 3/4 bolt circle, so we'll move over half of that, and then we'll drill our hole, and then we'll index it, drill another hole, index it, drill another hole. Keep going till we get all 6 of them. Then we'll just reverse the operation, glue this cylinder head on, and do the same thing for that cylinder head. So we'll get that set up and get the holes drilled, and then get them tapped. So we'll drill through with the tap and drill size, and then we'll drill through just the cylinder head for the clearance drill size, and then we'll get it tapped, and then we have to make up some studs, and then we'll get these cylinder heads bolted on. Okay, so we got those holes drilled and tapped and got the studs installed. So I worked really good doing it in the indexer. Had it set to 6 positions, and then I just drill one hole and then lift the pin up and then index it to the next hole. I don't get to use that indexer a lot, so that was fun to use that. It takes a 5C collet. But if you don't have an indexer, you could also use a hex 5C collet if you want to hold it in an arbor and put it in the hex collet, and then you can position the hex collet around and do it, or you can just lay it out and do it in the, just go to hold a hole, just drill it and tap it. And these are just 256 studs. Bolts would work also. I just chose to use studs on this one. So we'll see how the head's gonna fit. So that's gonna look good. Get some nuts on there. So let's get this cylinder bolted on and get everything together and see how it's all gonna fit. Okay, so I got everything bolted on. Got the cylinder bolted on, and the cylinder heads, front and the rear. And everything still works smoothly. Still moves good, no binding, so that's good. Had to adjust the piston position here. So you want about, when it stops at bottom dead center and top dead center, you want about the same distance between the piston to the end of the cylinder as the top and the bottom. So you want to center it, the travel of it in the cylinder. Had to adjust it just a little bit. And it is really tight on this rear cylinder head. There's only like a couple of thou larger what you drill that versus the rod there, which we will eventually make a packing nut to go in there to help seal that off. Everything works smoothly, fits good. Got the studs in there for the steam chest. So that's the next thing we're going to work on, is the steam chest. There's a piece of brass. Gets 9 holes drilled in it in the center, and then 4 holes drilled in it where it will slide onto these studs, so that there's a piece of brass, and then these 9 holes line up with the ports and the 3 holes in the center here. And then there's a piece of aluminum. Well, you can make this out of whatever. I'm going to make my inner piece out of brass, and then the actual steam chest out of aluminum, the valve plate out of brass, the steam chest out of aluminum, and then the cover out of brass. These are 1/16 thick, and then this is 1/4 inch thick. So I got a scrap piece of aluminum here that's 1/4 inch thick that we'll cut off for the steam chest. So once we get it to overall dimensions on the bandsaw, then we do need to put it in the 4-jaw chuck and turn a round section on both ends, and then it gets drilled through that to give clearance, to give a place for the valve rod. And then same thing on the cover here, we'll get this sawed out and get this sawed out. And then my plan is to actually super glue all 3 of these pieces together to drill these 4 holes for the studs at the same time so that everything lines up. So we'll get these cut out to overall dimension and drill these holes. And then we'll drill these holes, and then we'll come back and get a section machined out here in the middle. Probably drill these corners first and then mill all of this out. And then it gets a hole drilled and tapped from the top for the steam inlet. And that gets tapped 540, and then it gets drilled and tapped a 1032 from this end for another packing nut, and then for clearance for the valve rod. So we'll get all this band sawed out and then start drilling some holes in it. Okay, so we got the steam chest machined here. So to make this inside section here, I did take it to the drill press and I drilled in all four corners and then drilled a section out in the middle. I took out the majority of the material. And then just to do it an alternative way, you could definitely machine this out, but I decided to do this with just files after I drilled the holes. So I had layout lines on here and then filed it to these layout lines and then cleaned it up a little bit with the Dremel. So then we went back to the lathe, put it in the 4-jaw chuck, turned this section around down here and then drilled it for clearance for the valve rod, and then tapped it, drilled it, and then tapped it for our packing nut, and then drilled through on this end for the end of the valve rod. Then I flipped it back around, and then to center this up in the 4-jaw chuck, I did use a dial indicator. So instead of putting a center in it and using the dead center, I just used the dial indicator and checked it on side to side. You can rock it back and forth and find the high point. Then center this up and then check it here and then get this centered up. Just rock it until you find the high point and then check it again here to make sure this didn't move any. So then we cut this down round, and then it gets kind of a sphere on the end of it there, which I didn't have a corner radius tool that was the right size, but I had one that was close. So I cut what I could with that and then finished that off with a file and some sandpaper. And then drilled and tapped a 540 hole in the top for the port for the inlet there. So that finished up that piece. And then the two brass pieces here, this one gets 9 holes drilled in it that lines up to our ports. And then the cover. So then I super glued these two pieces to the aluminum and then drilled these corner holes, the mounting holes there together so that they would all stay lined up. So if we put this piece on here, you can see the holes that we have, and then these line up with it. So the 3 holes in the middle, I know it's going to be hard to see on camera, they line up with the center holes, and then these 3 holes on the outer edges lines up with the ports. So then we get this piece on here. And then our valve will go inside of here and work back and forth. And then we have the cover. So you can see how that all goes together and kind of sandwiches all of it in between there. And then we got our 256 studs here, and then nuts that goes on the end. And then I will probably put a gasket on this. I think I've got some pretty thin gasket material. I don't want to put too much because then it'll move everything out too far. I might see how it runs first and then decide. But if I do, I'll put a real thin gasket on there once we get all the valve timing and get everything set. Get these nuts on here. And we'll just snug that up a little bit. So there we go, that's the steam chest complete. So you can see our inlet here and then our exhaust here. So we'll eventually make some brass pieces that'll screw into there to hook a hose to, because I'm going to run this on air on the top, and then just a brass piece coming out for the exhaust on the bottom. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. So come back next time, we're going to continue on. So the next thing we're going to work on is making the actual valve, and then we'll eventually connect that to the valve rod, and then back to the eccentric, back to the crankshaft, And then we still need to make our packing nuts. And then once all that's complete, we'll have to set all of the timing and then we'll get it running. Thanks for watching.